So this will be the official beginning. So hello and welcome to RBCM at Home Summer. My name is Chris O'Connor and I'm a learning program developer at the Royal BC Museum. The museum and my home is on the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, here in Victoria on Vancouver Island. I'm an uninvited guest on this territory and grateful to live, learn, raise a family on this land. So today we're going on a little field trip, but not that far. We're traveling across the street from the Royal BC Museum to the Parliament building, home to the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia. Usually you would find members of the Legislative Assembly or MLAs here, but if you look and listen closely, you might even find some figures from the past. And that's what we're in store for today. We say hello to history today with the Parliamentary Players. So welcome, Nicholas, and welcome, Jenny. Hello from across the street. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're ready to go.
Great.
We can hear you.
And we're looking out the window right now, right?
We are. Hello, everyone. We're moving inside the Parliament buildings. My name is Nicholas, and I work here at the Parliamentary Education Office at the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia. The Legislative Assembly is also located on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, today known as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. We are currently in the third floor of the Parliamentary Library in the Ned de Beck Lounge. This is where members of the Legislative Assembly come to meet and discuss their latest ideas. This building was built between 1893 and 1897, and it stands as a monument to democracy here in BC. Now, I'm not an expert in this building, but I'll hand you over to someone who perhaps knows more about it than anyone else in just a second.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. What a thorough pleasure it is to meet you here today. I suppose it behooves me to introduce myself. My name is Francis Mawson Rattenbury, the BC architect. And what a thorough pleasure it is to welcome you here to my masterpiece, British Columbia's Parliament buildings. Now, my friends, as an architect, I am many things. I am a designer and an artist and a master of the form, but I am also a planner, a builder, a servant of function. When I first imagined these beautiful Parliament buildings, I tried to imagine the emotional response that I wish to elicit from each worker and visitor and servant of government who would eventually move about the place. I had to carefully consider the experience of being here, and of course what that experience must mean to each person who was. That is the form, ladies and gentlemen. That is the artistry. But I did not wish to overwhelm, Now, I ask you, what good could possibly come from so overpowering an observer to the point they are so affected by the experience, they can't remember why they're here in the first place? Now that, in fact, is exactly why this building is shaped as it is. You see, functionally, it has been designed for efficiency of movement, for the rapid and successful progress of one's daily business. Now, the basic silhouette of the structure is that of a cross, with each arm of the cross housing an assortment of government offices, ministers, and that sort of thing. But the center of the cross, ladies and gentlemen, houses the seat of our government, the legislative chamber. It is in this chamber that we enact laws and we initiate debates and we celebrate the strengths and the delicacies of democracy. It is the very heart of our legislative process. But for all of its very grand form, it would seem that I did make one tiny mistake. I was too rigid, you see. I was too fundamental. I may not have adequately considered the need of expansion, you see, because, well, British Columbia would grow. And of course it would, you know, this province's potential is limitless. Yet I may have inadvertently made the governing spaces limited, yes? All right, I'll admit it. In many places, the building is just too small, but, well, that was a beginner's mistake, you know, and I think I'm entitled to at least one mistake. I was only 25 years old, after all, very, very young, when my designs were first accepted by the powers that be, all the way back in 1893. And it would be just a few short years later, I would return to build this library that stands behind me, followed by the wings on either side of that, and all of this, ladies and gentlemen, every addition to keep up with the ever-fluctuating nature of government. Oh, and speaking of government, I think this would probably be an opportune moment for me to beg the forgiveness of the legislative staff of your time, who are faced with the ever-increasing need of functionality in these buildings. However, I think I can safely say that their work has been a success, and that my Parliament buildings, oh well, our Parliament buildings, why not, continue to this day to lead an interesting life. Oh, and that, my friends, is of vital importance to me, is the leading of an interesting life. As some of you may already know, my own life did take rather an interesting turn of its own. Very, very interesting indeed. Scandalous, some might say. But I take great pleasure and satisfaction at having created these buildings, along indeed with two of my other great structures here on the inner harbor, the Empress Hotel and the steamship terminals. I look at them often, and if I may say, I am simply awed by the majesty of their very existence. As a matter of fact, the great heartbreak, ladies and gentlemen, of my life began the day that I stood upon the deck of a departing ship, and I watched as my buildings grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared from my sight completely, and I knew then that it would be the final moment I would ever see them within my lifetime. I've fallen rather into disgrace, you see. The passion that so fueled my professional life did prove to have rather an equal, if opposite, effect on my private life. I was, potentially I was too successful at too young an age, or indeed potentially I had too much to prove. You know, these things are often a recipe for disaster, but, well, to put it bluntly, by the time I had reached my mid-50s, I had entered into a relationship with a young woman, which greatly displeased my wife. Her name was Alma, and she was a delightful creature. She was lovely. She was always jolly. She even smoked cigarettes in public. It was rather scandalous in my day. But she was also 30 years my junior. Alma and I, we did fall in love, and we obviously married. Of course we married, but not even that was enough to stave away my social assassination, you see. We were shunned by Victoria's upper classes, and so what could we do? We had no choice but to, in 1930, utterly defeated, sail away from this city and this province permanently. And it was, in my estimation, a tragic, if poetic, end to the tale of Victoria's most famous architect. Only that isn't really where the story ends, you see, because Alma and I, we settled in Bournemouth, England, and it was there that our age difference ultimately got the better of us, ladies and gentlemen. Now, shortly after our arrival, we found it necessary to hire a 17-year-old chauffeur by the name of George, and George was many things. He was youthful and vital, and Alma was dazzled by him, and I can hardly blame her for it, because pretty vibrant Alma was shackled to an old, arrogant, disgraced architect who had been someone once, And so she fell in love with George. And she moved him into our home. And then one evening, one or the other of them bludgeoned me to death with a mallet. Oh, you weren't expecting that? But as a matter of fact, neither was I. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it never will be made quite exactly clear who of the two of them performed the murder. I know, of course I know, but I am going to keep those particular details rather close to my chest, you see. Let the mystery live on, I say. And indeed, if ever I had hoped to recapture any of the fame that these buildings afforded me in my youth, why not as a result of my rather dramatic death? You know, the trial was an international sensation, as a matter of fact, and the Rattenbury name, as it should be, I might add, was once again printed in all the newspapers in the scandal sheets of England and Canada. Yes, you see, Alma had initially accepted responsibility for the deed, but then at the official hearing, she turned around and she pinned it all on George, and the court believed her, and so George was sentenced to hang, but Alma took her own life 3 days after his sentencing. And ironically, George then managed to escape the gallows because, you see, public opinion, had painted him as having been unduly influenced by an older woman, and so he was set free after having served only 7 years of his sentence, and he spent the remainder of his days living quietly in England. You can imagine that. Quiet life. But these Parliament buildings, ladies and gentlemen, the steamship terminals, the Empress Hotel, I think those then must serve as my final legacy and not the sordid details of my ultimate demise. You know, they're not the way that one would choose to be remembered in politer society, although it does lend one a certain air of glamour. Don't you agree? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, Mr. Rattenbury. You see, I was just outside the building looking around, and there's a great statue on the top, all covered in gold. Now, would you tell me, is that real gold up there?
Yes, actually, as a matter of fact, it is. It's gold leaf, albeit very thin. How did you get such a good eye?
Oh, I needed it. I'm a gold miner.
Oh, you're Nellie Cashman, aren't you? The miner's angel.
In the flesh. From the Caribou to the Klondike to California, I follow the gold rushes. I can spot a glint of ore at 1,000 places.
Oh, you must have made a fortune.
Well, yes and no. I did put my gold to good use, though, and something of a builder myself.
Oh, really?
Indeed. Everywhere I went, I always did my best to help build a hospital. St. Joseph's here in Victoria. That was me. I'm very proud of my buildings, but they're nowhere near as grand as these Parliament buildings. Winning a contract for a place like this must have made you a fortune.
Well, yes and no. I grant you the commission was very, very good, but I actually spent so much on fixings that the Department of Lands and Works eventually cut me off.
Oh, goodness!
Yes, but then I got involved in the Klondike Gold Rush. Well, why not?
You, in your fancy suit, mucking it for the rivers for gold?
Well, I didn't actually do any panning for gold or anything like that, goodness no, but you might remember a little trio of mail steamers that were called the Flora, the Aura, and the Nora.
Yes, terrible. Always late, never prepared for the ice. We had to use sled dogs instead because they were so unreliable. I take it they didn't make you a fortune either.
No, but I will point out that they did rather manage to deliver a shipment of beef north to Dawson City, and that did help feed some starving prospectors there. I'm no miner's angel, of course, but I did do my best.
And I'm no Massey architect, but I did mine.
Well, lump it with the fortunes. Why don't we let these buildings, the people we saved, those sorts of things, be our legacy instead?
Indeed, legacy. Being a woman in British Columbia, though, our legacies are a little bit complicated. You see, our early BC historians certainly had a bad habit of forgetting to mention us women. Not really their fault, I suppose. It is the way of the world in my time. And now in my day, the women of this province are pioneers in their own right, mostly get marked down as wife of so-and-so or mother of that other fella. Now, if you're a woman in British Columbia in the early days and you do manage to get your name remembered, well, you're either doing something very right or something very, very wrong. How about I tell you a bit of a story that you decide the equation? So it's me best. I'll just steal them for a few moments, Mr. Rattenbury.
Of course.
Miss Nellie Cashman, Victorian pioneer, is most pleased to make your acquaintance. I am very proud to count myself among the immigrant women who were, are, and forever will be a significant presence in the development of British Columbia. But because I am an immigrant, my story does not begin right here. No, we must go back to Ireland to explain how my life's twists and turns carried me to this place where we're meeting today. My tale begins in County Cork. I am but a child when my dad dies, and my mom can scarcely feed me sister and me, even in the best of times. So, when the worst of times comes to us, the potato famine, I mean, she does the only thing that offers a glimmer of hope. She bundles us up and we head to America. Now, we spent the better part of my youth in Boston. My ma is always aching for home, but there's no possibility of going back to Ireland. So, like many of our kids, we head west instead. California gold is calling a fair number of settlers to San Francisco. So, that's where we go to. Now, San Francisco is good for a laugh, but by 1869, it's already settled down from its rollicking rope of a gold rush. So I convinced me ma to come with me now to the silver mines of Nevada, and there we open a boarding house. Now, let me tell you, friends, Nevada in the 1870s is one exciting place to be. You can't spit without hitting an Irishman. So my ma is content. And I swear, that's truly where I learned to love a mining town. In fact, I'll spend the rest of my days seeking them out. Now, before your mind starts running away on you, you better know one more thing. You are speaking to a lady, through and through. I have never put myself in a compromising position, no matter the population, and always dedicated a good amount of my idle time donating funds to the local Catholic Church. But after that spell in Nevada, I'm about ready to pick up and head out on my own again. My ma is getting too old for the mining life, so I take her back to California, get her settled in there, and then I set out for a place with the most enticing name I have ever heard. British Columbia. Now, doesn't that just sound like the place to be? I guess you'd have to agree, seeing as you're here tuning in. Now, BC was no stranger to gold rushes at this point. The province was founded on it. The 1858 gold rush brought thousands of miners to the Fraser River, so many that Vancouver Island Governor James Douglas pronounced the name that mainland a colony. But when I got there, it was a province, not a colony. Now in BC, I opened another boarding house way up in the Cassiar. It's just a little bit south of Dees Lake. And I teach myself how to placer mine. Now, placer means free gold, but believe me, it certainly isn't free. A lot of us go broke trying to find the stuff. Eventually, I need a little break from the relentless pace of a gold seeker's life. And I have witnessed the beauty and splendor of this Vancouver Island. So I come here to Victoria. I want some pace, some rest, but life has other plans for me. I've only just arrived when I find out that rest in my bones will have to wait. A severe storm has stranded some miners back in the Cassiar, and to make matters worse, no fresh supplies can get in. That means scurvy. So I use up all my savings. I give myself some sleds and provisions. I hire 6 able-bodied men and we sail to Alaska, sneak up on that storm from behind. Then we get that food and medicine to those miners and save them from a wintry demise. After that, I am known throughout the West as the Angel of Mercy. Isn't that a fine way to be thought of? I'm so very proud of that name, and it stays with me for the rest of my days. My story doesn't begin in British Columbia, but it does end there. When I feel myself start to waken and I know my time is near, I ask to be brought back here to Victoria, to St. Joseph's Hospital, which I helped fund. Here, in this little town I grew to love, I spent my last breaths. So, after all that, can we call me a gold rush legend deserving of a statue or a name on a plaque in this fine building? Maybe. But I like to think I'm just typical of the spirit of the pioneering women of this province. Most of our names are forgotten now. You won't see us carved into stone or written down in the history books, not the same way you see the fellas. But I say, leave it to the men to memorialize themselves. Sisters, let us just live good, spirited lives and remind each other of one another when we're given half the chance. That's all any of us really need. And if you find someone who needs a little more, a helping hand maybe, you just remember, Nellie Cashman. She will always be your angel of mercy. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Miss Cashman, I enjoy hearing the story of your life. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you've enjoyed hearing a little bit from Miss Cashman and I today. I trust that there may just be some questions out there for us. What do you say, Chris? Are there any?
We don't have any questions right now, but if anyone does have any questions, if you can write them in the chat or the comment section of Facebook Live, please do it now. Thank you so much to the two of you for telling your stories.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Do you have any questions for each other?
Oh, goodness me.
Seeing as I'm already a married man, I shan't propose marriage.
Oh, goodness me, Rattenbury. Oh, it's such a flirt, isn't it?
That's what I do. Now, tell me, did you enjoy being a gold miner?
Oh, absolutely, I did. It was the great passion of my life.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yes, so much so that I never even married or anything. I just devoted myself just to the gold mining. How about you? Did you enjoy being a BC architect?
I enjoyed being an architect more than I could possibly say. You know, there is something rather gratifying about standing in one's structure and looking about. Pride, it fills my heart. Yes.
If we're still waiting for questions,
Oh, no, go ahead.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yes. So for what is the biggest change you've noticed now that you're here in 2021? What's the biggest change you've noticed to Victoria?
Oh, heavens, the buildings are getting taller and taller. Every day I see another building with another series of stories. It goes up and up and up. You know, I used to think that the fabulous copper dome on my beautiful Parliament building would be the highest anybody could possibly hope to reach, but these architects nowadays, they're reaching for the moon.
Very true. For me, it's the people here. When I was in Victoria, everyone was coming and going all over the place. But now I think people realize that Victoria is a place to stay. Everybody here loves it here and they spend all their time here. When I came, I was just bouncing back and forth, but I think this might be a place I stay for a while now.
You know, Miss Cashman, I think I might agree with you
Yes,
there.
indeed.
Thank you
And
so much. Chris, do we have any
that actually
questions?
makes me think of another question, just because you both came from other places and probably left family behind. Was that hard to move and head off to a new place in the world? And did you miss your family and your community back?
Indeed, it was difficult. When I left Ireland, I came with my ma and my sister Fanny, and at that time my dad Patrick had passed away as well. So we weren't leaving behind too much close family there in Ireland, but there is something about just picking up and going somewhere totally new and never going back. It's a little bit sad. I'll always have a piece of Ireland in my heart, but coming to Canada and exploring the world, I wouldn't trade that for the world.
You know, I rather feel like I agree with the end of your statement, but not the beginning. There was no love lost between me and merry old England when I finally stepped onto the boat. I yearned for a harbour such as that of Victoria, a dusty little backwater that was just crying out for development and reinvention. And unfortunately, the Industrial Revolution had already seen much of England develop. There was nothing left for me to do, nothing left for my genius to transform. And so I was happy to bid that country goodbye and say hello to a new one. Satisfied?
No, that's great. So we just give another moment for anyone if you'd like to ask either on Zoom, you could put it in the chat, or on Facebook Live, just to ask a question. Laura on Facebook Live is not a question, but a comment just saying, thanks, love the presentation.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Now come now, people, don't be shy. It's not every day that you get the chance to speak with a true bona fide celebrity, Francis Mawson Rattenbury. My genius is unequaled, and so it would be really a waste for you not to probe it, don't you think?
When did you know you wanted to be an architect?
You know, I was very young. My father was rather an artist. He had left his position in business in order to dally about with pen and paper. And I found that I had inherited his skill. I knew that I was at least going to be something spectacular. And it just happened to be that my mother's side of the family, the Mawson side of the family, had an architectural firm. And my mother, trying to prevent me perhaps from misspending my youth, saw to it that I would apprentice there with my uncles. Perhaps you might have heard of the Lockwood and Mawson architectural firm. They were responsible for such marvels as the Saltaire Model Village in England. Now, they produced some truly marvelous things, not least of which was me. A youthful desire, sir.
I also have another question for yourself. What was your favorite part when you're going up in Alaska? Was there anything that was your favorite to see there, or something that was the most troubling to see there?
Oh goodness, well, I will say I love gold mining. I always have and I always will. But it was never easy gold mining. We were quite often very, very cold all the way up in Alaska. There were times where I was trekking through snow that was up to my waist. I'm only 5 foot tall, so it's quite a bit of snow that can get me going. But I love it, like I said, but I think I could have gone with a little bit a better environment that would have made my day just a wee bit better.
Wonderful. Chris, we're right at the top of 11:30. Yeah. Is there any more questions?
There is not. So thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you, Francis Rattenbury. Thank you, Nellie Cashman. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, everyone, for everyone joining. And it was such a pleasure to get a little window into both of your stories and the very exciting and important place that both of you have in history. So thank you so much for everything, and we'll end. Do you have any final words, Nellie and Francis?
Oh, just thank you very much for coming. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome.
All right, and on that, goodbye.